Vijay, you were the federal government's first chief data scientist for President Obama, having worked on the Precision Medicine Initiative and the Cancer Moonshot Initiative, as well as working as a former advisor to the NIH on various data science initiatives. So I want to start by focusing a little bit on your roles in policy. And a lot of people may think that working with government is probably the least efficient path to realizing the potential of a lot of technologies that have been developed in academia or industry. So how have you found, or how do you think the government may be working with the government may provide you a unique advantage in accelerating kind of the age of genomic and precision medicine?
It's a great question. So let's think about this in the context of our history as a country. The United States is the only country to have sent a probe to every single planet. It's the first country to decode the human genome. It's the country that unlocked the secrets of the atom, both for beneficial reasons and weapons, and have had a long history in that. The country has stepped on so many forefronts, or opened so many forefronts on science. Those are problems that can't be done by an individual. They require a team, they require an infrastructure, and they really require a national effort to become real. That handshake of innovation has led to unlocking incredible amounts of dollars for in the case of the human genome, is, for every dollar that we've invested, the $100 million we invested there, we've gotten tenfold back. And so when you use the full force of the United States to go after a problem, it really changes the arc of our, not only the impact that we can have, but also the benefits that are there. And so what would this look like if we really took leveraged the full force of the United States of America against cancer? I think we'd see a very different outcome. And one of the things I think we've left behind that we had in the 60s and other time periods is, what does it really take to rally the full power to go after some of these problems? And so the innovation that needs to happen, we have to bring those ties back more closely. How it all ties together, from government funding all the way through entrepreneurship to large-scale scalability across not only the nation but internationally.
Right. And I think one of the themes that you touched on is, because specifically in healthcare there's such an operational component, having that entity behind some of the policies that are required is probably very robust in itself.
Right. But when you think about policy, what is policy for? Policy can create incentives, can create alignment. It also acts as a safeguard. And many times when people get frustrated around a policy, it's very easy to kind of turn FDA into some kind of punching bag. But let's ask, why does the FDA exist? It turns out they exist because a small number of people were poisoned because people were coming up with these fake drugs. And as a result, you need a group that protects it.
Right.
And so people trust our infrastructure. Like when you take a drug, or somebody gives you something from Walgreens or CVS or wherever you get your pharmaceuticals, you don't question, is this real or not? In other countries, that's the case. You don't know. You have to try to figure out who the supplier is and is there trust. We don't have Yelp around our suppliers. We just trust that this drug, whether it's blue, red, white, capsule, whatever, we trust it. That is through the long efforts of what the government does provide.
Now, on this thread of trust, of course, when we think about the exchange and the use of private but also very kind of uniquely identifying health data, much of the discourse has been around protection of that raw information. But do you believe that we may want to kind of shift focus, or really need to think more about policy attention in regulating the algorithms themselves that are used to generate insights from some of this clinical data?
So there's two parts that I think we need to, well, there's actually n parts, because this is a very n-dimensional problem. So the first part is there's the underlying data and who has ownership of that data. I would like to believe we all live in a world where it's our own data. If my child has a need for their data, they should be able to access it. Somebody else shouldn't just necessarily profit off of their data. So that's, I think, the basic building block of this. We often get caught up in just the idea of how do we get access to the data. While that's interesting, I think what's more needed is the idea of system interoperability. Is that if we're trying to have one part of the care team interact with another part of the care team, that data should be seamlessly there. When you work with an online vendor like Walmart or Amazon, you don't have to go to FedEx or DHL or UPS to where the package is. It integrates with those APIs and systems, so you know where your package is. It's all seamless. That level of infrastructure is very readily available in this day and age. What we don't have is the handshakes and the agreement that move that data back and forth to make it very easy for it to take place. And that's the system operability. Then there's what happens on top of that data, and that's the algorithms. And there's a lot of questions about that, of how do we ensure that these algorithms actually work on behalf of our interests rather than against our interests. Right. The way that we talk about it is how do we ensure that technology works for us rather than against us. And we have a big, gigantic question of that, of our day around these things. Not only around privacy and security and access to the data, but who is determining those aspects. We still have a system where with our data, and especially our clinical trials, is over-biased to white middle-aged males. Why? Because hospitals are in affluent areas. Who takes care of people when they're sick? Well, especially if they're white males, where that's the disproportionate population. It's the women. Why aren't women in there? Because when women are sick, there's no one advocating for them. So we have the system is already skewed due to dynamics of our social structure.
Do you think there's also an element of skew in the concept of intentionally not revealing some proprietary information regarding technologies that people are developing in industry and academia? So, you're a former technologist, we in academia as well, there's a lot of hard work into developing a lot of innovative models. And to a certain extent, there's a tension between needing to protect the efforts of innovators with the need to be transparent for the collective good of our patients.
Right. Well, we have a model for that, right? Like if you're working with a trader in a Wall Street or finance environment, you definitely have algorithms that are proprietary, but there is a regulatory process to ensure that there's a way of that is not going to bias one group or another.
Right.
That needs another approach for us as we start to implement these algorithms with healthcare. This is why the FDA actually has clinical trials the way they do. It's the same way, is that you need some type of body that says, yes, you do have rights. You are working hard to make sure that you preserve the intellectual property. That is a core central tenet of our system. And we also have to have somebody who acts on behalf of the public to ensure that is doing right by them.
Okay. And what's been particularly fascinating to me about kind of your work and your interests is in patterning at kind of the local genomic level, but then also more broadly at the population health level. So can you tell us a little bit more about your work on this front?
Well, so Precision Medicine Initiative tries to blend both of these. So we do have the human genome. We've stepped through that scientific breakthrough. How come we don't all benefit from it yet? Like there was a view at that time where it was like, yeah, we'd all have our DNA have a sequence and we'd benefit from it. Like we'd have tailored drug treatments, we'd have all of those things there, but it's not on our file, and it's not still readily easily accessible except for the sort of the low fidelity version that you see from the 23andMe's and others.
Right.
What would it look like to have the next level of tailored medical treatments? What would it look like in our lifetime where we're able to look back and we say, geez, we did medicine that way? Why did we do it as a one-size-fits-all? Like that's the error we should enable. And it is something fascinating that we can do this type of tailored technology for certain areas. Like you look at our advertising sophistication and the targeting that you can do that way. We haven't put that infrastructure in for the medical side of the world. And I look forward to the day when we can have that type of customization. And by the way, it is happening, but it's happening in very small pockets. Here at Stanford, it can happen for 1% of the population that gets care here. It's very expensive, and it takes a lot of resources from the institute to do that. What would it look like for us to do that for every single person? That's what we should step through.
Now, I know you spend much of your time thinking about some of these questions relating to the future of policy and precision health medicine initiatives. If we look back to the past for a minute, some of the greatest, the landmark inventions and discoveries in medicine were developed by physicians, physicists, nurses, patients, who were really just able to ask the simple and really innocent question of just what if? They might have had an intuition about disease and the management of disease, and they could, in some interesting, simple way, test that and see what happened, right? So looking, now switching from kind of that past perspective, looking to the future, we have a lot of this information, a lot of people that may have some intuitions about their health, might have ideas about how to manage it best. What are the existing bottlenecks that concern you most, or that you're also most excited to tackle, that can allow us to generate a more efficient system that democratizes health outcomes research?
Well, the first is this idea of citizen scientist. What would it take for anybody to be able to play with a bunch of data? There's something about having a lab, and there's having something about an access to a keyboard and a connection. And if you can, the lab is expensive. There's also real important questions around bioethics and training that is required to make sure that not only the person producing or doing the science is safe, but that people around them are safe as well. In the sense of data science, you can do so much more in there. And so what would it look like if we empowered those people to do more science? And I see that as a very exciting opportunity for people to find and discover correlations. The same way with me playing with weather data as a graduate student to find interesting discoveries. You could argue that what business did I have really playing with weather data when I was supposed to be working on other things? But I could, because I just found a data set. We need more of that. And we've started to see that. We've seen algorithms through competitions on platforms like Kaggle and other things where people are able to test their ideas and say, hey, look, I found something super creative or super cool. Comets have been discovered by amateur astronomers. That's incredible. What would it look like if we had some 13-year-old kid playing with data, and she discovers, a new model of care, or the new ideas, and this is happening already. Like I've met so many kids around the country who are just playing with data from public data sets from the National Institutes of Health around small code snippets of DNA to piece those things together, or playing with other kinds of tools or to see what could happen. We need more of that.
Now, I know that you at one point in your career, you were also at LinkedIn, where you guys were able to do a lot of really interesting studies on the data that people were submitting on their profiles relating to kind of their career trajectory. And in that case, you as a data scientist, or you're fairly certain that people have incentive to document the correct information, right? So you have trust in the data.
That was designed. It was designed, actually. The system was designed to incent good data.
Right, exactly. So you have that element of incentivization for people to tell the truth about themselves, and then you could do really interesting work on top of that.
Right.
Do you think in healthcare we have a little bit of a unique problem that a lot of the data that we get from the public data sets that we can get from many other repositories fundamentally have many systematic inaccuracies and other issues that, from a data science perspective, are very, very challenging.
Where's the incentive in healthcare for the data to be right? The only incentive that for the data to ever be right is around billing. Because imagine instead, like when you get a receipt back at a restaurant, or you get a package delivered, you kind of get a list of like, here's the things that are in there, here's the documentation. You get a bill, you get an invoice, and you get to see it, and you get to be like, hey, is this right or not? You don't get that when you interact with the healthcare system.
Right.
Whether it's on costs or the actual outcomes. So there's no incentive for the actual right documentation of the data. As a result, that starts to spiral it into a place where it doesn't give you the right values that we want to make the system better and better. So I think there are a number of places that if we had some of that little bit of almost behavioral economics to expose the data for you to review the data, you would see things right away. You'd be like, wait, hold on. No, that didn't happen. And we hear all the time. Somebody looks at their access to their patient data and they're like, that's not me.
Right.
You know, we just had one just a couple weeks ago where somebody was described as being pregnant and they were clearly not, or never had been. And they were like, how do we convince the care team that we're not this?
Right. And I think some of the issues, there's been a great deal of research at Stanford kind of characterizing what you're talking about, which is the difference between what patients report about their disease and their management and what we actually capture in the healthcare system as being disproportionately relevant in immigrant populations and populations of low socioeconomic status that may not have the tools available to them to communicate in ways that are equitable.
Well, let's talk about the most perverse one, mental health issues. Because documentation of a mental health issue can cause a whole slew of problems for you later in life for other systems or other places. Federal government can cause all sorts of, including rationale for not to have security. So those things encourage a stigma around it and prevent good quality of care. And so people won't diagnose them. We've seen this around abortions. Somebody who has an abortion doesn't want it on their medical record or for it to show up because they don't want the stigma. And we have to get beyond that and really ask what is the right documentation needed to ensure the right care. And people should have the ability to not just vet it, but also to really protect it and make sure that it works for them. And right now, some of those data elements that could be there could be used against them. And we should be thinking about it from that perspective.
Now, you were selected as a keynote speaker for our conference this year. For viewers that are viewing us today, what are some themes that you hope to impart in the medical community, the technology community, as we look to kind of the future in precision health initiatives?
So one I would say is we all need to go faster. Like there's so much opportunity. We have to go faster. The faster we go, the better off we're going to be overall. Two is, who is the we? The we aren't people just with lab coats. They're not just people on the keyboards and the computers. The we is the patient. It's the care team. It's the families. It's everyone. And we have to take a new approach of what does it mean for us to all be in together on this problem. And then third is, I would say, is we have to fight the cynicism. It's very easy right now to say, you know what, the system doesn't work, it's got this problem, it's got that problem. We got to move and level up above that. We're better than that. This is the country that has done so many things. We lead from the front. We cannot accept just the system as it is. The people we serve, whether it's in healthcare or families, they deserve better. The people that we are laying the groundwork for deserve better. You're training right now on a mission to be not only in medicine, but have a doctorate as well. You're laying the next forefront for science discoveries, as well for actually direct care of people. How do we take that and make that scalable so it benefits the entire population we have. That is well within our scope. That is well within not just the scope of a system, but is within the scope of each individual.
And I think at a time now where there are so many potential obstacles that people can think about, having that perspective and that momentum and that positivity is really impactful.
I believe it.
So thank you so much for sharing your insights and all your interesting perspectives with us here today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.